Hi guys, welcome back to the Butterfly Effect podcast. We are still not bitten because we are doing the final episode of The Walking Dead Season 2. This is episode 5, this is no going back. And also, here's a little fun fact for you. Jack and I have already recorded this, but right before I was about to hit end recording, our voice thing crashed. So we're recording it all over again for you guys. So yeah, just a bit of attention seeking there. But that shows the commitment we go around here. Jack, we're just going to go and do the classic thing. Well, actually, no, we're not. I'm going to kind of go off-piste a little bit. Usually we start with the choices. The choices kind of like marry well with the chronologically. So I'm just going to go and, do it based off of, like the order that we kind of like get the scenes in, lad. I'm going to start off with the shootout scene. Now, we spoke highly of the cliffhanger in the last episode. Especially like me with the fact that I shot Rebecca while you let Kenny do it. So for me, I was like feeling guilty for 3 months, and I was so excited to see the conclusion of this. But ultimately, mate, we were a bit disappointed, and I just want you to spitball why.
Yeah, I was. It's super dumb. Like, the thing is, you've said it perfectly. Like, it teed up really nicely as a cliffhanger. You're thinking as a showdown, you think, oh my god, and especially from your angle with like Clem starting it, you think, oh, does this mean that I'm gonna get someone in our gang killed off, X, Y, and Z? They're all stood about 5 foot away from one another, and therefore like someone's got to die, right? So you boot up episode 5, you probably waited like 2 or 3 months for it, and then suddenly everyone's further apart, characters are behind walls, characters are behind trees. No one's been hit apart from one girl that, we've never even met before or care about. No one can land a shot. And it just sort of like, I don't know, it feels like a slap in the face in terms of like for what the hype was the end of episode 4, mate.
Big time, because you do have like a few hits, but only one's fatal instantly, right? Which is like the Russian girl. But yeah, you just have like Luke who gets hit in the leg, Mike in the arm. And I mentioned this like in the scrap recording last time, mate, but I know it's movies and games and stuff, and you shouldn't take this stuff too seriously. But I guess, I come from like a military background family, and it does kind of pee me off a little bit when I do sort of see like inconsistencies and just dumb things like that. Like, why the hell is the bald guy sat in the middle out in the open shooting at someone while Kenny sat in the open as well? Like, aiming for the guy in the tree when there's a guy next to him. Like, he eventually kills him, but he's just there for way too long. So, like, there's people that, like, could have, like, killed each other, but they just didn't take the opportunity to. You've got Mike and Bonnie doing fuck all behind the wall. Like, it's just, like, it's so stupid. And I just, like, tried to think, mate, how we have wrote this scene differently, right? And, like, the kind of thing I sort of mentioned before is that I might have just actually killed off Mike here, because we sort of say that he is a bit of a spare part. Like, they scrapped the story of him being like a bandit that kind of separated Clementine and Krista. Like, maybe kill him off. Like, I know we get like a major scene with him later on, but maybe another character could have filled that void instead, potentially. I don't know, like, I just feel like one instant death just wasn't enough, and it just kind of really it cheapened the epic cliffhanger we got in episode 4.
Oh, 100% agreed. Because that's the thing, like, you want a payoff of sorts, don't you? You want there to be casualties on both sides, which there wasn't at all. It was like all of Arvo's gang, got killed off, but Arvo. Even if it was a case of like Mike getting shot and, he then dies later in the episode or something like that. Maybe that could have worked. Like you say, he could have been killed off there and then. But yeah, it just, I don't know, it didn't really feel like there was a situation where both sides could have lost. And I know that it's got episode 5 and stuff, and like, you've got to wrap it up. So maybe they were thinking, oh, we've done it with Rebecca, maybe we can't do it with another character. But at the same time, like, I don't know. It didn't feel like we said, like it paid off for like the cliffhanger.
Nah, I completely understand, mate. I mean, nonetheless, though, when like the whole sort of like scene ends with Jane coming to the rescue and killing the final guy, when you saw her, mate, were you relieved to see her? Did you think, oh, this bitch again, she left, now she's back? So, did you forgive her, or was there resentment on your end?
To be honest, like when I first played the game, I didn't really have any feelings towards Jane. It's actually since this playthrough and since like we've had these discussions and spoke to the guys on the stream and that Jane's become like a far more compelling character to me, especially like when we compare her with Kenny, for instance, which we'll do in another video. But looking at it, I mean, you do have to think like, oh, this girl just takes off whenever she wants. Leaving destruction in her wake. Again, we've seen what happened with Sarah in the previous one. She says that she's independent and this and that. So why does she keep coming back? She can't seem to make her mind up. But then again, it was a pretty awesome kill, with that guy that was in the woods. He had like he got knifed. He got the knife in the back of his neck, right? And then he's got like a shot to the head, pretty gruesome death. And yeah, it does nicely tee up the whole, for what happens in the end of this episode. So I guess overall, I am glad that she's back.
Nah, big time, lad. Yeah, I quite like Jet. I think the reason she came back as well is because obviously she lost one sister before. And I think she kind of had Clem. She saw her as a little sister because Clem and Jane kind of have that kind of sister vibe going on. And I feel like she walks away because of how chaotic the group is. But I feel like Jane's more human than she lets on, and I feel like her coming back to the group is her, like, maybe she was, like, lonely and she realised she made a mistake. Because, like, from this point, she will kind of stick with Clem, or try to at least. So, yeah, I think that's why she does it. But, yeah, like, we'll come to learn, especially when we get to the big choice, that I'm a big Jane head. I quite like Jane, so, yeah, I was really glad to see her. So, lad, we have a lot of, like, dialogue sort of heavy, like scenes coming up before we really get to the ice scene. So it's just kind of a lot of walking. You patch Kenny's eye up at one point, replace his bandage. There is like a pretty significant power station scene where you spend the night, behind some fences where Arvo is now your hostage. I just wanted to kind of ask you, because you're a Kenny fan. As a Kenny fan, what did you make of him beating the Russian kid constantly throughout the journey, mate?
Yeah, no, it was incredibly unnecessary, wasn't it? Like, it's not something you can defend Kenny in this instance at all. But I do feel like, again, this is like a Telltale ploy to, like, again, maybe, I don't know if there was an agenda behind it, but perhaps throw seeds of doubt into the player, who obviously, we're playing as Clem. Is this guy the right one to stick with? If you're thinking about that end choice. So I really feel like it's been happening all season, but especially in this one with his treatment of Arvo, his, just constant rowing with the group when everyone else seems a little bit more calm and reasonably minded. It's like they're really trying to say, yeah, this guy's a ticking time bomb, and are you sure that you want to be on this guy's side come the end of it? They're like really laying the groundwork for that. So yeah, his treatment of Arvo, while, he's probably absolutely still pissed because he's got his own stuff going on with like the death of Sarita and obviously stuff from season 1, X, Y, and Z, you can't really defend it, can you?
No, for sure. And like, as we will mount up to the whole Jane versus Kenny sort of end choice at the end of the game. So be patient, guys. We are getting there. But yeah, I do think obviously this speaks volumes of kind of like the downward spiral and Kenny's like sort of like mental health kind of thing and how more erratic he's becoming. And I do think there is this underlying theme in season 2 of how long do you stick with Kenny before you realize it's too far, because like you start to realize like the rest of the group is kind of pulling away, and whether you're still Team Kenny or not is completely down to you. And I think it's just so well written and interesting that people pull off at different points, or they don't pull off, or they stick with him the whole way. So yeah, certainly fascinating. Are there any sort of significant scenes at the power station you want to mention? Like the only sort of one I kind of want to highlight is I did chuckle. I know Mike is a nothing character, but I did really like his line where Luke talks about what degree he did. and how he hasn't fully paid off like the loan or something, and then Mike said, "Nah, I bet some asshole's still sitting on that paperwork," which I don't know, I really enjoyed. But yeah, any sort of kind of things you want to mention about the power station scene, lad?
Only to come back to something that you mentioned in the last one, which completely flew over my head, and that was like the slight romantic angle with Bonnie and Luke, which I had no idea about, and it was only till I sat down. Because, quick side note is like, I am one of those people that sometimes in these like, you know, down scenes where you're just sort of dialogue, and I can get a little bit sort of distracted with other things, and I might not pay attention. So I actually sat down for like analysis purposes for this bit, and I think it's something said about, you know, him being his birthday and Jane's over there, and, oh, should we invite Jane over because, you know, you clearly bonked and all this sort of thing. And he looks across at Bonnie and she's like, "Don't worry, like, it's okay." And I was like, damn, like, I've never picked this up before. And I can't remember where previously in the season it was even alluded to be honest, because where Luke wasn't with the group in the first place, I just never saw that connection between him and Bonnie anyway. So maybe that's like a little bit of independent research for me there. But it's one of them good to know things.
I think it's just one of those ones where, you know what, I went on the wiki and someone labelled their relationship as exes. Whether there was a relationship House Hardware store or not, I'm unsure. However, maybe that explains things. And I do think it is one of those seeds that are planted to kind of like really set up this ice scene and the consequence of the ice scene. So, I mean, we move on from that, and then we go to the famous and pretty dark. I'm not a fan of it, not because it's written poorly, but because, you know, we will lose a beloved character at this point. We're at the ice scene, and I mean, I'm just going to ask you before we get here, why the fuck didn't they walk around?
Oh, your guess is as good as mine. Another thing as well, just if we're on this like little nitpicking train at the minute, is they say, "Don't bundle up." And what do? They're all bundling up. And then when you've got the choice with Luke, and, you know, there's clearly cracks around him, and Bonnie's like, "Clem, run over and help him." And you think, what? You think that's going to help, really? Like, you know, me going over, where that's going to add more weight, and then we're both going to go in, which, you know, in my playthrough is ultimately what happened. So yeah, I mean, like, it's like a, you know, us being nitpicks, there's definitely things to pick at here, but equally for me, I'd say it's probably the second most, maybe third most, I don't know, iconic scene in this entire season.
Yeah, it, like, if I think episode 5, you think the final choice as well as this bit, don't you? Obviously, we lose a beloved character in Luke. I just want to kind of get the choice you did. Did you listen to Bonnie and run to Luke, or did you cover?
So yeah, I helped Luke. Again, in that instance, I was like, oh, you know what, just sod it, because it's probably going to be a case where Bonnie then goes over, and that's even more dumb because she weighs more, etc. Also, as well, that is what the stream voted for, so I'm going to go with whatever they went with. And I'll tell you what, it brings about like such a haunting death. Like, I mean, speaking for me personally, like, the death by drowning just terrifies me anyway. But you got to think the environment they're in. They're moving further north, really cold. There's walkers, of course. The walker is like grabbed Luke and he's like pulling him down. Really dark when you just start to see him fall into that abyss. Clem, could she have done more? Yeah, probably. At least, you know, pretend to try. But she just sort of looks, and then she's hooked out by Bonnie, I think. One of definitely the most, like, I'm gonna fucking word this. I'm to go back to the word haunting. Yeah, like, really dark. And although for me, Luke isn't one of those characters that, like, is a go-to in my mind. You know, I do think he's a little bit overrated. Maybe that's a bit of a hot take. But still, like, the way it was done, yeah, it was done very well.
Yeah, I get you with the whole Luke being overrated point. I really liked him as a character, potentially because he was the most well-adjusted character in the chaotic group we were thrown with this season, other than kind of maybe Jane when she comes along being all level-headed, and that maybe Mike as well. But yeah, like Luke, he acted as that big brother kind of role. But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, he got written out of the game. Which, you know, I have an interesting thing to mention now, but I'll just quickly say what I did. I did the opposite to you because I just thought me coming over is a bad idea because it will add weight. I thought it was maybe one of those trap decisions where it wanted to like dupe me into doing that. So I covered him, but as a result, like you mentioned, you're right, Bonnie does go instead, and then they both fall in. Basically, someone has to fall in with Luke. It's either you or Bonnie. What's interesting as well, though, is that you probably got the better death because, like, he dies a hero's death if you do that. Because while you're trying to escape, you elude one walker, the second one comes after you, and then yeah, like Luke will bring it down into the waters to the depths with him. So like, what a legend! What a way to go out. But for myself, I mean, I still really like the writing of it because I never fell in the water. I don't think you know, was trying to save Luke, and I like shot the ice, and then I was like hammering it and like smashing it, and there's no music. It's just the ice, and you've just got Jane in the background saying it's too late, and it's just ice being hit in the silence. And I quite like the fact there was no music. Like usually you would like Telltale Walking Dead will throw like really kind of somber music at you during a sad scene. This didn't. It just added to it that like the sound you're listening to is just the harsh environments. So yeah, just a little kind of like nice technique on a kind of writing level there. But yeah, in terms of Luke being, you know, like dying here, and it's something, you know, and it's not going to be news to you because we have recorded this episode once already. But I did mention there was a bunch of cut content, right? So someone like went on the Michonne game files, and there was a load of unused content from season 2. And one was actually Luke being pulled out the water. So there was an original idea, I imagine, where Luke would have survived this scene. How he would have been used later, I don't know. But very interesting stuff, mate, right? To learn that Luke initially was meant to survive here.
Very, and it makes me think as to how that end scene would have played out, because you get the impression that it would have been Kenny versus someone. So does that mean that, you know, Luke was just going to perhaps get in the car with Mike and Bonnie and leave? And that's how he would have, you know, ended his role in this season? Could it been that he died somehow later, or maybe even Jane took that place? You don't know, but I feel like a death at the lake was probably a good thing because, you know, as terrible as it sounds, a little bit before that it was a bit of a slow burner. You know, when you're at the power station, very dialogue heavy. Some of the player needs, you know, you need to wake up a little bit. So I probably, you know, as intrigued as I am, I'm probably happy with how it played out.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I want to clear up as well is that there's this whole rumor out there about some girl called Lexi who, I don't know, there's loads of weird variations on the rumor. Apparently she shipped Luke and Clem, and there's, you know, like romantically, which is really weird considering the age gap and the fact that Clementine's a fucking child. But also just the fact that there were spoilers out there that the whole conclusion was supposed to be Luke versus Kenny, which I subscribe to because the whole season kind of gears that way if we look at scenes like the dinner table scene. So I always kind of bought into the subscription that like they changed the ending last minute and made it Jane versus Kenny. But I have looked, and it is a rumor. It is just someone who was seeking attention online. The voice actor for Kenny, Gavin Hammond, I believe his name, has confirmed it himself, so we can dismiss that instantly. But yeah, going back to cut content, the fact that Luke was supposed to survive, I agree. I think Kenny versus Jane is the better ending because you've kind of got the person who's human but maybe too human versus like the robot but like the survival better option. I don't know, and I think that is a more compelling choice. However, when I'm talking about cut content, mate, there is a lot more in that Michonne sort of file that one YouTuber found. There's things such as Alvin fishing in episode 1 that was removed. There's things like Kenny shoving Sarah, which is interesting because they have very limited or no interactions whatsoever. And then things as well, such as Wyatt waving to Carver, Shell planting seeds. Maybe she was supposed to be at that whole scene, you know, in the greenhouse where Reggie dies. And then Clem trying to hug Jane but failing. And another thing as well, mate, is you're supposed to have a dodging sequence when you fall in the stream in episode 1 when you get separated from Krista, and you're supposed to dodge rocks and stuff. Really interesting, and it goes to show you, with other things we've mentioned, such as Mike being reduced to just a prisoner rather than being a bandit. And another little interesting thing as well, mate, is that they were going to have Eddie as Arvo, so Eddie, Wyatt's friend in 400 Days, which is why he is kind of like secretly on the poster in Amid the Ruins, which is why everyone thought Eddie was going to be in the game again. But mate, it just goes to show they cut a lot of content this season. So like, do you have any theories why you think that was, and do you think the game's actually worse or better as a result for that?
They made like wholesale changes, didn't they, for what the ideas were to the final product. But as far as my take, I mean, God, like poor Sarah. Like, I'm glad they did cut out the Kenny shoving her, because how much more abuse can this girl take from middle-aged men and Clem? Think about it. Yeah, I think the ones that stood out to me is, perhaps like the Alvin fishing scene. One of the characters' early doors, perhaps this is speaking for me because I didn't have the heroic Alvin ending, in episode 3, but a character that I feel like I could have had more time with, especially because he's ultimately going to be like the father, or at least the stand-in father, AJ, which is a character that's, becomes very prominent later on in this Walking Dead series. I think the other one, it's the Eddie thing. Why did they not just throw Eddie in there instead of Arvo? I mean, we've already touched on this for episode 3 and the use of Walking Dead for 400 Days characters anyway. And I think that would have just been a nice bit of continuity, probably a better payoff, just for fans that had that experience of 400 Days. So like there's some things in there that I'm not too arsed about. The shell with the seeds, I mean, if it's not that important, just cut it. But like a few things, mate, that I do wish made the final thing.
Here's a sort of random idea that I'm throwing in the hat. I can't remember if I discussed this in the first recording or not, but how about getting rid of the Russians? Not fully. But getting rid of the Russians and putting in the 400 Days characters instead, so you're more conflicted at the end. So instead of having like the 4 people you've not really met, or the 3 in Arvo, instead you could have, whether it's Eddie, Vince, Russell, Shell, gathered round. And then like, I just think it would be a more fitting ending, because you'd be more conflicted as to what to do. And it would just be a bit more powerful because there'd be continuity. I just think that might have been the better variation, and it would have been a lot more satisfying for the fan and the gamer.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've played as them characters before. So we've got like some sort of relationship and empathy with them previously. Whether it was Wyatt, with like the car chase and Eddie, Shell and, escaping with her sister. I can't remember her name now. Do you know what I mean? You've like got a little bit of background on these people, but like, the Russians that turn up, Arvo, you're dumping them in like, towards the back end of episode 4, and we're suddenly meant to, show morality, or like suddenly start to care for them massively. And it's like, well, we've come this far. I've seen Kenny batter Carver's face in. We've seen other characters get done by the walkers and stuff. At this point, it's just like, have at it. Like, I'm not actually that arsed. So I'd rather have seen some of them characters come back. And it would have thrown up more interesting choices, I imagine.
While we're talking about 400 Days a little bit, I want to tell back to the ice scene where there's Bonnie. So for you, Bonnie would have like covered and like maybe pulled you out the lake, unless it is Jane that does that. But she would have been a good friend with you. She would have said, "Oh yeah, Clem did what I said. She tried to save Luke," and she's goody with you the whole time, even to the point where you have the later cast scene with Mike. She's really apologetic, and she, is like, "Oh, why has this happened?" With me, very different. I didn't go in, so she blamed me for Luke's death. And later on, she's smoking a cigarette and she snipes at you and she calls you a stupid little girl. So, really interesting that, like we said with Kenny, where depending on what you did with Sarita in that cliffhanger, whether you cut her arm off or killed the walker, Kenny was a lot nicer to you. Mean as fuck to me. And we've got the same with Bonnie, mate. Apparently I've made the wrong choice again, because I've got Bonnie sniping at me. So, although, like, we give Season 2 its flowers as well as its criticism, cool again, mate, that we've got, like, that varying dialogue again, haven't we?
Yeah, and it is something that I've noticed. Like if we are comparing it to season 1, you've got to say that the branching is just it is stronger. Probably gets stronger again in New Frontier. I can't quite remember. I have to probably replay it. But yeah, like at least some of these choices through your actions, through dialogue, they do actually matter, and it piques curiosity because I want to see angry Bonnie now. I can almost picture what Kenny would look like when he's angry at Clem, angry Bonnie. And didn't you say as well that like when Arvo shoots Clem, that she's just very like unsympathetic when she stands over you as they go to escape in the car?
I believe so. Yeah, it's so interesting, and yeah, like you say, you couldn't imagine an angry Bonnie. And as like a young sort of like younger Liam, like it really took me back. I was like, oh my god, Bonnie's angry at me. She's snapping at me. And again, it's because she liked Luke and she blames you for it. The other thing I mentioned in the last stream, so you don't have to act surprised because I revealed it to you before. Sorry, fans, you don't get to see Jack's fresh reaction. But you learned in the last stream, didn't you, that Bonnie can actually die earlier at the ice scene?
No, really? Yeah, again, like that, it really did take me by surprise, that, because again, you think it's just going to be that, it's classic Telltale. It's another scene where one character drops off, but no, the fact that Bonnie can go, yeah, I thought that was really good, because again, you think that she's one of them characters that just, sails on through to the end, to the car, and then goes, and it just, I mean, admittedly, I have only played this game twice, but having played it twice, there's still stuff to learn. And I think the common criticism with a Telltale experience is, once you've played it once, maybe 1.5 times or a little quick Google search, you pretty much know it. But there's still like things that's getting thrown up to this day. So I really love that bit of info.
Yeah, no, big time, lad. Afterwards, mate, we do kind of go into like the house and stuff. You get the fire sorted. There's more tension with like Kenny beating the Russian kid again, and then everyone kind of getting like more like detached from him and maybe scared of Kenny's actions. And then it gets to the point where he fixes the car, and Mike and Arvo and potentially Bonnie will try and leave in the night. What did you do when you went out and kind of confronted them?
I mean, again, blind playthrough, we're talking. I had my Kenny head on, and the thing is, you did just have a very powerful scene with Kenny, like in terms of he's telling you, and again, this is where it's sort of I lean towards him because he's got that group mentality to look after and protect everyone, where he's saying stuff to you like, I need you on side, Clem, because I really want to get these people to Wellington where I know that we can build up and have a better life. So then when you see that betrayal, Kenny's probably asleep or whatever in the house, they're ready to take off with the car that he just fixed. I was sat there thinking, nah, I can't let this go. So yeah, I just shouted out to Kenny, and then that's ultimately when Clem got shot, mate. So yeah, I was happy to go against it. Again, it was Mike and Bonnie. Specifically Mike. I know we've trashed this character quite a bit, but I didn't care too much for him, so it was a pretty easy decision.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I probably didn't do anything. I probably just said words, and to the point Arvo shot me. We got a bit of cut of content again, didn't we, where there's actually the option to shoot and potentially kill Mike, where Arvo will shoot you back, but they cut that from the game. And we were like really fascinated by this, and it's potentially just to really kind of minimize Clem as kind of like an evil character. But I feel like they should have left that in, because like you very much in this kind of stream playthrough you've been having on Twitch, you've been playing badass Clem, where you're kind of sniping at Bonnie and Jane a little bit, and like you're standing up to Carver, and it was really cool to see, and I think it very much works and kind of really evolves well from the season 1 Clem that we once know. So I would have been all for like shooting Mike in season 2. I think that would have been cool to have.
Yeah, I mean, maybe as a reason why they pulled it is literally because we had not been to shoot Rebecca in the previous one. So maybe they're thinking, God damn, yeah, maybe we can't have Clem kill 2 characters off within the space of half an episode or whatever,
Yeah, potentially. I'm trying to toy with ideas as well, mate, and I'm wondering if like because I said they could have probably killed Mike at the shootout, and I'm wondering if at this point you actually save Luke and you're supposed to get pulled out of the ice, and it's actually Luke that leaves with Arvo, because not only would it kind of be not maybe him betraying and it could shock you a bit more. I think there'd be more of a shock factor in Luke running off with Arvo and potentially Bonnie, so they could kind of like revisit that romance angle there. But also I just think that it kind of goes hand in hand with the Kenny versus Luke strand throughout season 2 that kind of eventually kind of gets neglected, I guess. Because, you know, you've got the dinner table scene, and what if it led to the fact that Luke is, like, scared of Kenny or, like, wants to protect the group, and he strongly in his mind thinks that leaving Kenny is the correct option. So, I don't know, mate. Am I just kind of, like, on a wild one there, or do you think there's merit in that?
I think so, yeah. And I think, you know, he's a popular character, so to keep him alive would be a good thing. Like, I've just had an idea based off of that as well. It's kind of dark, but, like, you know how you said about like potentially shooting Mike? In my version, I've just completely written Mike out the game. Maybe Mike could be the one that died in the lake, right? So then Luke goes forward, and Luke and Arvo and Bonnie are the ones planning to escape. Arvo shoots you. You then get the choice to shoot Arvo. But if you take it, Luke jumps in front of the shot and then ultimately dies. I thought that would be quite pretty powerful. I've just thought that up on the spot.
Yeah, I'd say so. I actually really like that idea. So, guys, in the comments, let us know what you think of that. Would that have been the better game? So, I mean, eventually, mate, like, Kenny, Jane, they come to the rescue, and, you know, like, they'll chase them off, they'll leave on foot, and then you pass out. And then it goes into this pretty significant flashback scene, which you're quite a fan of, aren't you?
Oh, I'm a big fan, yeah. You know what? It's because I feel like I've got an episode ranking in mind for this, but actually, and I know that episode 5 does have its quite slow scenes, but the more I'm thinking about it, there are some like pretty iconic scenes in episode 5 as well. Obviously, the ending, the ice scene, but this one as well, I think is a very touching scene, very cleverly done, with Lee and Clem like in back of the RV. Again, they bring up the season 1 music, so you get this rush of nostalgia. And because Clem is like this character that has done so much this season, taken so much responsibility, which is a good thing because it shows competence, you can't help but feel like there is that sense of like reassurance with Lee being there, like that father figure looking after her. So it was just a nice like little 5 minutes to see that relationship again and just harken back to, you know, what season 1 brought.
No, I agree. It definitely warmed my heart. Like season 1, there definitely is that place, and then you almost just feel like you're back with a father figure, don't you? And you just feel safe for that brief moment. And it's probably all the more gutting when you wake up in the back of a car with Jane and Kenny. But nonetheless, we go through the snowstorm scene, mate, and then I mean, I'll cut to the chase. Like, you know, it ends up to this whole conclusion where you've eventually learned that Kenny and Jane, they will not live in harmony. You're at an ultimatum, it's one or the other, and they're having this big fight scene, and eventually Kenny is about to win. We'll just go straight for it, mate. The choice, did you let Kenny stab Jane or did you shoot Kenny?
I let Kenny stab Jane. I mean, this was, both playthroughs thinking about it. And speaking from a blind playthrough, I'm not going to sit here and try and now argue the case, you know, for Kenny over Jane. He's far superior or any of that. It was just plain bias. It was plain bias. I didn't want to be the one responsible to end Kenny. But what I do think is quite nice and interesting is that if you are the one that shoots Kenny, as he dies, he says that you made the right call. So do you know what I mean? Like, it would have been horrible for like that relationship to end. Well, I mean, it is still pretty bad. You know, she shot the guy, but he's clearly dying. He says something about Duck, doesn't he? How he's going to go and see Duck. We've seen it's probably a good payoff considering the decline that we've seen throughout the whole series. But blind playthrough, I just couldn't bring myself to do it, mate. What about you?
I shot Kenny, so obviously this is where we differ, but I fucking love that this is where we differ, because look out in the future, guys, there's going to be a debate video, Jane versus Kenny, who did you choose? But yeah, no, honestly, I think there's a few reasons. Yeah, I'm kind of the believer that I I kind of rooted for Lily over Kenny in season 1. And this is pre Lily's like mental breakdown, right? This is like, I'm talking salt licks getting dropped on Larry's head. I disagreed with it. The fact that Kenny would be like really erratic. I was always a bit like, I think Lily's actually the level-headed one here. And then that kind of blew up in my face when she just went mad. When Kenny came back, I didn't hate him. I was so happy to see him. I hugged him. But yeah, like I do think, like I mentioned earlier, I think he is declining again, and I do think there is a point you let him go, and I think it is now. I think it comes from the fact as well, I didn't want Eva dying, but because Kenny was in the driver's seat about to kill Jane, there was kind of a protection instinct in me to save Jane. So I think Kenny naturally got the bullet, and like you mentioned as well, I do think it was the right choice because. He said, "Oh, you made the right call. It broke my heart when I saw you sit with Luke at dinner, not me." He harked back to that, but also he almost smiles and he says how proud he is of you, and I do think it is the right call. Like obviously, there's all the little alternate endings where he goes to take you to Wellington, whatever it is. So there is that, and that is probably an even better place to write Kenny out of the game if you are that, but probably better that than the way season 3 will write him off with the fucking car scene. Such a poor way to write off such a brilliant character, and I'm sure we will talk about that in the future. But yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I absolutely love Jane because, like I said, we're going to talk more and more in more detail about it in that video we are going to do in the debate episode. But I just think Jane, yeah, she lacks a bit of humanity. She kind of mentioned something about how a baby would drag you down. She kind of is all she's really cold. She's all for ditching the group, but she sees something in you. I think Jane values survival, and she does kind of think cutting weak people off might be a reason, a valid thing to do. But I just think that she has this sister bond in Clem, and I do think they are a dynamic duo. We saw the way they were kind of killing zombies together outside the trailer park. One thing that we should talk about, mate, is the whole thing of Jane hiding the baby, right? I mean, when you said Kenny, did you look at that and think, well, now I'm glad I saved Kenny, because this is such a shitty thing to do on Jane's part?
I did, yeah, and it's a big argument that I'm going to be bringing in that debate episode, mate. So you've lined me up for that nicely. Yeah, it very much was. It very much was in my mind. What I would say is that I do think the way things ended in my second run through, because we've already mentioned the decline of Kenny and stuff, I do think that actually the ending I had this time around was the right one, i.e. you go with Kenny to Wellington, and then, in my blind playthrough, I chose to stick with him. I wish I didn't do that because, like I say, you get the terrible ways handled in season 3. But the fact you then have this, again, really touching scene, and the more I think about it, I'm like, damn, episode 5 does have some hard hitters. That bit where, he sacrifices himself. You're outside, he says, just take the kids, He's had that conversation with you before about, the responsibility he's had to get everyone to this point. And he's got Clem and AJ to a point where they're going to be looked after, fed, they're going to be safe from walkers. He's done his bit. And then obviously it makes it more poignant and touching when he walks away, or even before he says, I don't want to look back. He then walks away, he stops, he gives a glance of the head, you think, is he going to look back? But he doesn't. He carries on walking forward, and there's a little bit of mystery as to what happens with Kenny after that, and I quite like that. I'd rather that than see him just become, roadkill.
Nah, big time. I do think the Kenny endings are more superior to the Jane ones, because with the house hardware store, it's just you go back there, which I disagree with. I wanted Jane, but I wanted Jane North. You go back to the hardware store and it's just a family come, and it's do you let them in or do you not? And it's just a bit meh. The whole thing going back to the baby though is that I kind of disagree with the writing. I don't really think Jane would do it and I disagree for the reason she did it. She says she did it to prove that Kenny's this monster when he kind of lashes out, which she sort of was right, because he does blow a fuse. However, like I mentioned, mate, I was already there. I was already on Team Jane. I didn't need that. So it did leave a sour taste in my mouth, not only because it was unnecessary, but I almost don't think Jane would do that. I almost think it was poor writing to kind of create a more level 50-50 choice, perhaps. I'm unsure. So with the fact that it did happen though, because I can't sort of just say, oh, Jane wouldn't do that and kind of obliviously pretend it didn't. I do think in hindsight, if I was to do a new playthrough, the fact that, you know, I'm less of just a person who would just like bend over backwards for whatever, you know, like a girl says. I do think that I would go solo. I think I would look at Jane in the eye and be like, no, I'm leaving you now. And I think there is an art to that as well, because it's like you get rid of Kenny. He's been a great servant to you, but he's ready to go and see Darkcatcher Sarita in that weird argument that's potentially going to go down in, you know, heaven. But I don't know, like I just feel like I would go solo here, because I think Jane looks at you like, oh yeah, I'm lonely actually, I need a sister figure. And you just sort of think, nah, Kenny's taught me everything he could, you've taught me everything you could, and Lee's taught me most of what I know. I do not need you. I'm going to look after AJ solo. Which I think if you look at the way New Frontier and Season 4 goes, it probably is the most canon ending. So yeah, that is probably what I would end up doing. But nonetheless, I mean, that is the end of The Walking Dead, mate.
And you know what? Just to finish off on that point there, makes a lot of sense, because when they're literally moments before in the car, Jane is having a go at Kenny saying, oh, you know, everyone's secretly scared of you. All you are is you're this person that manipulates to get people to do what you want. You think you know best, all this X, Y, and Z. And you look at it and there's a massive hypocrisy there, because what Jane's just done is to try and manipulate Clem into thinking that, yeah, the baby's dead, therefore Kenny needs to die. So I think that actually, and given the fact that she's been teaching you to stay away from toxic people and that she can do it herself and stuff, but it's actually come full circle, it's come back on Jane quite a bit. And it would actually be very fitting for Clem to then turn around and be like, yeah, you've taught me everything I need to know, and what you've just done means that I'm now going to have the strength of mind to turn my back on you and go it alone.
That's why I think they massively did her dirty, and you know, it's kind of why I'm like, yeah, well, fair play, way to ruin Jane there. And this is why I'm gonna go solo, because you're gonna have, like, if you play badass Clem, you start the game kind of alone. I guess you have Christopher and Amy, but then you end the game alone, and then you tee off into the rest of the seasons, badass Clem playing, you know, into New Frontier. But I mean, guys, in the comments, let us know what your choices were for this episode. Let us know in advance if you're Team Jane, Team Kenny. Let us know if you're excited for our debate video. Just in summary, Jack, to end the thing, at the start of the analysis, you said Season 2 was better than Season 1. Have you wavered on that opinion?
I have, and I feel like I've come down to it from this, is that the thing is, the Walking Dead games, there's not really a plot, is there? It's essentially just people surviving. It's more character emphasis than plot emphasis. And as a result, I do think that the Season 1 characters are just more memorable and more strong. Perhaps there's more talking points. I'd say that with Season 2, there's a lot of like filler characters. Like we've mentioned Mike already, you know, we've sort of brought the Russians in late sort of thing. Whereas, yeah, Season 1 just had an ensemble that sticks out more to me. It's just more iconic. What I would say gameplay-wise is that Season 2 is stronger. If you think about, you know, the payoff with like the various choices and things, the fact that Bonnie can die, but actually she can escape as well. She can live from the end of the season. So yeah, it's a pretty difficult call. It's just, I guess, what your preference is at the end of the day.
No, big time. Yeah, I think Season 1 pips it for me, but it's probably nostalgia bias. We talk about recency bias. Telltale was what reignited the choice-based game and the Choice Matters franchise for me, that really put me on the wave for this channel. And also, you know, it's kind of the game that got you on the map, right, for liking these games. So I think Season 1 takes the cake on that front. But guys, it's been an absolute honour doing this analysis series for you. It's actually performed very well as well. So I just want to thank you all for the support. There's so many comments, so many views that have come in. You guys are fucking awesome. We'll look to do more Walking Dead Season 2 videos, so if you want more of this, do not fear, we've got loads of ideas planned. But until then, guys, we will see you in the next one. Take care for now.
One last thing from me, big thank you for everyone that joined my stream for this game as well. It means a great deal, and yeah, see you next time.
Bye, guys.